So in video number one, I'll be discussing the social welfare systems, and I'll be talking about residual, institutional, and developmental views of social welfare. I'll be discussing the author's perspective on social welfare, and then I'll also give my take on it and which view I believe is the most effective. So through this assignment, I learned that the most common view of social welfare at a particular time was that of the residual view. And with the residual view, it's basically, it was temporary assistance. Some things that went along with that, it was seen as a safety net. It was reactive or gap filling. Basically, with residual welfare, it was aimed at the poor and for a set amount of time. Basically, in order to qualify for welfare under the residual view, you would exhaust your other resources. So these would be for people who have no other way of help. You know, they've exhausted their family resources, their church and community resources, and this was like a very last resort. Like I mentioned before, was aimed at the poor. And a couple examples of residual welfare would be things such as TANF, which is the temporary aid for needy families, SNAP benefits, even shelters for battered women were examples of residual welfare. And I believe the reason why that was the most common view of welfare at that time was, people wanted to keep people in poverty from being dependent on welfare and dependent on the government. So, I can understand that. Once a person was essentially back on their feet, they would no longer qualify for help, for welfare. And that's the residual view. It's temporary, it's aimed at the poor. So the next view would be institutional welfare, which is basically the belief that everyone should receive help from the government, not just the poor, and not just for a select amount of time, but ongoing. So with institutional welfare, basically the idea was everyone received some form of help from the government, of course, so that all could be self-sufficient. So when you're looking at institutional welfare, you're looking at things such as entitlements, which are things that everyone are entitled to. So you would say free education, access to affordable health care, access to healthy food, and even social security would be seen as an entitlement. Institutional welfare is the view rather, is an all-inclusive approach for the whole and not just a few. And when I think of institutional welfare, I think of macro level. We want to look at programs and systems that affect the whole and not just a select few. And then the last view of the welfare, the welfare society would be the developmental view. So with developmental welfare, that idea is that you empower individuals so that they can elevate themselves out of the realm where you would need poverty. So essentially, if the person has the right socioeconomic factors, things are set in place so that that particular person can be their best selves, and they don't need to receive help from the government. And the developmental view makes me think of a strength-based approach. So we want to hone in on the skills of that individual person. It's aimed at alleviating poverty and inequalities starting at the individual level. It's a lifelong process aiming at tapping into a person's potential so that they can elevate themselves out of the realm of people who need poverty. It develops human capacity and self-reliance. It also is a pro-poor strategy. It's aimed at the poor population and vulnerable populations. And then the three main concepts under the developmental view are education, health, and employment. So if everyone has access to quality education and everyone has access to affordable health care, and if everyone has access to employment, reasonable employment, then every individual can become their best self and thrive in society. So it actually makes me think of the conditions that bacteria need in order to thrive. Because under the developmental view, we want to have the right socioeconomic and the right political structures so that everyone can be successful and be their best selves. So that makes me think of like bacteria. Bacteria need the right pH level, they need oxygen, they need the right temperature in order to thrive. And essentially, that's comparable to the developmental view of social welfare. Because you're aiming at the individual person, it would be comparable with micro level social work. And what I thought was interesting on page 14 of our textbook, Understanding Social Welfare, it's the ninth edition, and Dolgoff and Feldstein are the authors. On page 14, it says the greatest help goes to the most people through institutional change, such as quality education, job creation, improved housing, and equitable health services. So that's the author's view of what they feel is the most beneficial social welfare view. They register most with the institutional view, and I can understand that by myself personally. And one thing that I aim to do when I become a working social worker, I identify more with the developmental view. I want to empower individuals to be their best selves so that they can be successful. Thank you.